If everyone could be seated, please. If we could all come back to order. I'm going to do this one more time. Last chance on the general plan update. Is there anybody else in the audience wishing to speak to this? Closing the public testimony. And now, before staff gives their comments, we do have two speakers who want to speak on non-agenda items. So I'd like to get that out of the way so we're not keeping you here till 4:30 or 5 o'clock. So up first is Elizabeth Banks. Elizabeth, you're up, followed by Sherry Alvarado.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Banks, 418 Chinkapin Avenue. I've lived in Carlsbad for 45 years. In fact, I've lived on Chinkapin for 45 years. And thank you for allowing me to speak. I feel like saying, hi, I'm Elizabeth, the small and meek, just like Dorothy did at the Wizard of Oz. This is intimidating. I'm not a public speaker, but I really, really am passionate about what I'm going to mention, and that's about the Caruso Mall on the Hedionda. I understand that the City Council is now reviewing it, as well as the commissioners. And I have problems with it only because it's called the citizens petition, but I really don't think it is. I think Caruso paid the petitioners $9 a signature to lie to the public to get these signatures. And the reason I know that is because I've talked to my friends, neighbors, and family, some who did sign the petition and some who said that they were misled. And a petitioner came to my door and said, if you sign this petition, you are guaranteed to see this issue on the ballot. So, and other lies as well. For instance, like they thought that they would tell them that the strawberry fields were in jeopardy of that area was being in jeopardy of being bought by another commercial developer that was going to do away with the the strawberry fields. There's a lot of different issues also about the plan itself. It bypasses it bypasses your authority and the commissioner's authority. And that bothers me because I live in a little area that has been developed quite a bit, and I have gone to the Planning Commission and gotten a lot of assistance from the Planning Commission. I'm kind of concerned that the City Council is not in on this. I went to one of the meetings where Caruso gave these sweeping promises of connecting a trail from the Discovery Center all the way. Oh my goodness. Oh, well, anyway, the League of Women's Voters, Buena Vista Audubon Society, Preserve Calavera have all said this much more eloquently than I ever could. But I just wanted to let the city, and I did have a posse. They all had to leave. I'm sorry. Just wanted to let you know how I'm concerned that this is going to go through without without even CEQA oversight. This is a nice little rustic lagoon, and it would be so nice to it is nice to go on the freeway, see the lagoon, and not some big, ugly mall, and then know that Carlsbad is really serious about preserving open spaces.
Hi, I'm Sherry Alvarado once again. 3331 Tyler Street. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you we've worked with you guys and listened to you for over 4 years, and I appreciate everything you've done. I also want to take a moment to thank our city staff, the council members. We have a great city council. I live in the Barrio area, and I have talked to many, many people. We have a group of over 50 strong, Old Carlsbad Village Association, and I kept getting the same feedback. They don't care about us. They won't listen to us. They don't care they don't want to hear us. Well, now we have met with every single city council member one-on-one. And believe me, our Carlsbad Barrios area is changing, and it's becoming better and better. It's the domino effect. It's going up. And I want to thank all of you. I appreciate you guys giving us the time to talk to you. It's making it a better area. And for everybody that lives in Carlsbad, believe me, this city council is helping you become it will be an area where you can say, I'm proud to have that area. It's no longer a depressed area. It is part of the village. It is. Right now, Carlsbad has a half a village. You drive down Carlsbad Village Drive, you have the village. You go to the left, you have the barrio. But we are cleaning our area up, and believe me, you are going to be very proud of it. It is a great area, and it's because of this city council staff that we have. Thank you guys so much. Also, they also have organized a group where we're meeting, and hopefully we're going to start having monthly meetings. And they're listening to us. They want to hear what we want to say. And we're hoping to get Neighborhood Watch and a lot of other things that are very, very positive. Thank you all so very much.
Okay, that, I think, closes the public non-agenda item part of the afternoon. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Dodson and let you introduce the next portion of the responses.
Thank you, Mayor, and I would like to reintroduce Don New, and we will take some time to respond to the public comment today.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Council and Planning Commission. We heard a lot of comments today, and some of them very detailed. Some themes emerged, and I think, generally speaking, we would like to respond to some of the broader themes. I do expect that as we get into deliberations on all the components of the project, we'll get into much greater detail on some of these. Of course, one of the early or reoccurring themes that we heard today concerned the Ponto area properties. And I understand the confusion that some members of the community had about what exactly was being proposed. You may recall we did spend a lot of time working on the Ponto Beachfront vision plan and taking that through the city's process, and we were not successful in getting it through the Coastal Commission. So our objective in the general plan was to implement the Ponto Vision Plan. There were items studied in the general plan process at a higher density. I think we heard about the R30 that we did consider throughout the process as a potential option. And that was done at the request of the property owner, that the city considered the higher density. Then they later requested that we look at the Ponto vision plan density. So what is proposed in the staff recommendation is that you would consider the basically implementation of the Ponto vision plan. So it was the step that we were not able to take last time when we got to the Coastal Commission stage. I would say also, I think we heard from the current applicant on the property. We do have a project application in, and that will go through our normal review process. We will do environmental review on the project should the land use changes occur. And then, of course, the project design will go through a review process with our Planning Commission. We had a speaker speak about Robertson Ranch Planning Area 22, and that's the area southeast of College and Cannon. That is one of our sites proposed for an increase in, or I should say a change from an office land use to, I think it was an R30 designation. And there were some concerns about compatibility. We're well aware of those. We also have an application on that property. I think a reoccurring theme for a couple of these sites is that the general plan process was not quick enough for some of the private market, and so we were finding a couple of applications coming in before decisions were made on the land use, trying to at least start the review process. So on this particular one, the staff recommendation was to support the Planning Area 22 change. We're well aware of the issues that the Rancho Carlsbad community has concerns about, and if in fact that change is proposed, we will work to implement mitigation or project design features that would address some of those things. Let's see, I would like to kind of hold on till we get through some of the other topics to some of the issues about the cap. Obviously, the 100% renewable energy goal was mentioned repeatedly, and so I'd like to kind of save that towards the end if we could. There's additional questions raised on the Sunny Creek commercial area, and that's the College and El Camino corner. And our plan initially when we went out and had our land use alternatives, we looked at properties beyond just the commercial piece itself, but some of the surrounding properties were included in the analysis. What the recommendation before you from staff is looking at is just the commercial property. We're not recommending that you change the adjacent properties from their current low density, but that you would consider changing, I believe it's about 9.6 acres of the 17 plus acre site to a residential category. And as you heard in our original presentation, that would help us meet our sites requirement in some of the higher density ranges. And I think one of the speakers mentioned I believe it was 180 or so dwelling units, and or 182, and I think that is about what our projection is for the site, so that would be consistent with that speaker's comments. Let's see. One of the other comments that I heard had to do with our the way we treat residential care facilities. You're probably familiar, we've had a number of projects in the community, and those are not counted as residential dwelling units under our growth management program. We have something in our municipal code called a commercial living unit that covers those types of units as well as timeshare hotel units. We have been through litigation in more recent years, and the city prevailed on that particular case, which validated our way of treating those as not being residential dwelling units. I know there are some members of the community that would ask that we count those, but for purposes of growth management, they're not treated as a residential dwelling unit. There are a lot of comments made about some of the factors that are in our EIR, for example, water supply being one, other public facilities, and we did analyze those in the EIR, the same with school capacity and other facilities. As you're aware, those are growth management facility standards, and so we did propose land use changes that did not cause impacts to those facilities in terms of violating our growth management requirements. At this point, I would like to hold on going into great detail on those until we get into the individual deliberations from each of the groups, if that's acceptable. We did hear a comment as well about the aesthetics of development, and there was a request that additional emphasis be put in the land use community design element on that topic. That is a possibility. I would just say that in terms of how we've treated that, historically it's been in the individual development plans or in zoning and other types of implementing standards. In the area of residential single family, we have a council policy that deals with architectural guidelines. So we have not so much treated it as a larger policy question, but as more of an implementing measure. And I would say that was one of the things that struck me. Some of the items being discussed are very specific things that could, in fact, include policies in the general plan, but in many cases are directed more at implementing measures or specific things that either we will do in our next phases, which include updating the zoning code or additional follow-up ordinances. Along those lines, there was a comment about the city needing to have a noise ordinance, and I think both the commission and the council is aware our noise regulations are primarily geared towards new development and then as well as construction activities or manufacturing processes. So we don't have something, I think, as was requested that addresses nuisance or kind of adjacent land use impacts in an operational way, such as the La Casa Resort case. So that's something in our general plan noise element, we did have a policy in there about revisiting our noise guidelines manual, but it doesn't go as far as to say consider a noise ordinance that would address these other things. So I guess all I would add on that is that that's something that the commission and the city council may consider and make some decisions as to whether you feel that's appropriate. There was a number of comments made about the airport, and we have spent time with county airport staff and the public works staff. As you're aware, we have a provision in the general plan that addresses expansion of the airport and does require the voters to authorize any expansion. And it's my recollection that the policies and the way that was placed in the city's codes really addresses the physical or the boundary expansion of the airport. So if the land area of the airport were to be proposed to be expanded, that would require a vote of the people of Carlsbad to permit that. We've spent a lot of time with our legal staff and with county staff going back and forth over what is the city's abilities to regulate the airport, both from the standpoint of the county as another governmental agency as well as the FAA's requirements. So at this point, what we tried to do was clarify what the Carlsbad restrictions were on the land area expansion of the airport and address some of the compatibility issues. For example, the general plan and our land use planning deals with uses in the vicinity of the airport and their requirement to be consistent with the airport land use compatibility plan. So we accomplished that with the general plan, but we did not get into operational things which the airport, which we felt were outside of our purview. I think we heard from at least 2 property owners about concerns with the cleanup mapping changes. And in our presentation, we were characterizing those as basically either changes where we're adjusting boundaries, or in some cases, we have a general plan and zoning designation that doesn't match one another and or match what has been built. So for an example, in some of the R3 neighborhoods, the R3 zone today allows multifamily and single-family development, but your ability to develop more than single-family homes is dictated by the density of the general plan. So in those cases where we had an R3 zone with our current RLM, or low to medium density, that's a single-family density, and a neighborhood was developed with single-family lots and single-family homes, our recommendation was to change the zoning to be consistent with what was constructed and or what the general plan density was. So we can specifically look at the examples mentioned today and see if there's an adjustment needed, but that was generally the process we followed, was to try to gain conformance with what was built as well as the densities that were planned for. In regard to the Barrio area, or the area south of Carlsbad Village Drive, I think both the commission and the council is aware we are working on a village barrio master plan. We were not proposing changes to land uses as part of this effort, but we are proposing changes to that plan and to expand its boundaries. So we will be looking in greater detail at those areas, but at this time we were reflecting changes we made previously in terms of some density adjustments in the perimeter areas of the barrio and trying to provide for infill development. But we were not proposing to expand the commercial land uses unless they come about as part of the village master plan. I do believe, and someone can correct me if I'm mistaken on this, but the general plan does propose or provide policies for rail crossings, particularly in the Chestnut area, as well as the city looks and works with Sandag and other agencies about potentially trenching the railroad through the northern part of the community. So we are making provisions or policy provisions for that, should that be something that's desired. There were some comments made about the concern that we would run out of units in the excess dwelling unit bank, and why do we transfer units, and why are we trying to use all the units? And admittedly, our process with our growth management program is somewhat complicated. It's not something that most communities have, and so it's another constraint that we work with. And I will say that our proposal is keeping within the voter-mandated total number of residential units, and in fact not using all those. Some time back, the council did remove units from the bank so that we would not unless the council restored those, ever reach the maximum number allowed by the voter proposition. But the growth management program establishes dwelling unit limits by quadrant, and then as projects have not reached those potential unit capacities, they go into the excess bank and can be reallocated. And you might recall we were one of the few jurisdictions with a habitat management plan, and one of the effects of the habitat management plan was to designate areas that had previously been thought to be developable as open space. And by doing that, that then created excess units that went into the bank. In many cases, the habitat management plan does call for transferring those units to other areas of a property, or they go into the bank and then they can be reallocated elsewhere. So we do propose to leave surplus units in the bank with the recommendation that we've made. And as you heard, I think when Ms. Jesser presented the land use changes, we do expect additional units to be deposited. But there will be a point in time that we will come up to our unit cap, I would imagine. And at that point, we aren't quite sure what will happen, but that'll be a very significant policy issue for the community and for the councils and the commission. Let's see. In regard to affordable housing, Mr. DeCordova went through our housing requirements with our regional housing needs assessment and how the different density ranges help us satisfy the requirements we have from the state. And as proposed, we do feel that we are in good shape in terms of getting the state certification should our element be approved locally. But, as you heard, there are some additional sites, the Palomar Oaks Way site, some of the others that either community members supported or opposed. And what we've tried to do in studying all those was to provide flexibility for you decision makers as to which you would support based on what you hear from the community and what you believe are the benefits and the negatives of each site. So I would think that's going to be a good part of your discussions on these matters. There could be sites that you would prefer to remove, in which case if that causes us a concern or a problem in meeting our housing obligation, one of the other sites would have to be put in. And that was the thinking, and looking at more than what our growth management could accommodate was so that there was that flexibility, that we didn't lock everyone into having no choices or no options. Admittedly, having the choices may be a little difficult, but we're proposing something that we think is based on rationale of the policies and goals in the general plan, and there's certainly room for you to make adjustments to that. Let's see. In regard to open space, and we did provide in the environmental impact report a master response because that was a significant comment made by the community. And without going into great detail on that, we often hear the issue of the 40% open space, and I believe the plan, as we've calculated, we think gets us to, around the 38% mark. So that it was expressed today on a couple occasions about why not add a goal for 40%. That's certainly something that you could consider. I guess I would just say the concern would be oftentimes, even though it might be called a goal, there may be an expectation that now you absolutely have to meet it, but that is something that you might want to give some thought to. To gain the 2%, to get to 40%, I believe we calculated would require 500 additional acres beyond what's already expected through implementation of our habitat plan and the designations that we have today. So it's a pretty significant goal, not to say it's not one worthy to strive for, but I think our concern was we didn't want to obligate the city to going for that at this point. In terms of open space, all of the land use changes that we have on the proposal today are not looking to change any open space lands. In fact, all the properties that were proposed to change in some fashion were already designated for some type of development, whether it be residential or non-residential. So it wasn't a case of we're shorting or reducing open space. We did make adjustments in some cases to reflect resources, but at this point, that's trying to accurately reflect those resources as well as some of the land ownership patterns. Let's see. In regard to some of our work with the BIA and the affordable housing requirement, as one of your actions, we are proposing, consistent with the Council's Policy 43, that any of the projects that receive these density increases, that there would be a higher affordable or inclusionary housing requirement. That's certainly something that both the Commission and the Council can modify or discuss different options. But the way the policy is crafted right now, it treats those as a financial incentive. So in exchange for that, and because the excess dwelling units are a finite resource, we felt it was appropriate to try to obtain a commitment for affordable housing that was above our 15%. So I would think that's going to be a topic of some additional discussion. A couple of the other additional issues, particularly as it related to open space, I think you heard some comments regarding enforcement of rules in open space, and at this point, I'm not sure that there's a lot in the general plan that addresses that. That is something that's mentioned in the habitat management plan, and I know we've had other staff in the city that have been working on that. Many of the preserves that are under active management, for example, the Center of Natural Lands Management, they do provide rangers. I know they have limited availability, so it's really a resourcing question between some of the preserve managers as well as whether the city wants to get into having something, as was suggested, like rangers or some other way of providing enforcement, but that is presently not something that's included in the general plan. I think unless a commissioner or council member has another comment, I think we probably want to just briefly address some of the climate action plan questions, and I'm going to turn that over to Mr. DeCordova in regard to some of those issues.
Thank you, Mr. New. With respect to the Climate Action Plan, in my presentation, I did walk you through the required components of that Climate Action Plan and the importance of having measures that are realistic, achievable, and enforceable, and that's required as a matter of CEQA. And I know that a number of comments that were raised this morning were to encourage the city to include a 100% renewable energy goal as part of its climate action plan. So when we were putting together our climate action plan, we evaluated a whole range of potential measures that could be included in it. And the approach that we took was, again, to look at measures that we felt had promise and had applicability to this community, that could be achievable, and that were easily, that were measurable and enforceable. There are literally hundreds of measures that could be considered. We had to boil them down to a manageable set. So while there is not included in the Climate Action Plan a 100% renewable energy goal, that isn't to say that something couldn't occur at some point in the future. So one of the other points that I made in my presentation is that this Climate Action Plan is actually intended to be adaptable. So we know that circumstances will change, technology is going to change in the future in ways that we can't necessarily even anticipate today. So there's always that ability to adapt the Climate Action Plan to changing circumstances. Let's see. There was a comment or two about the enforceability of the measure, so I did want to to sort of reiterate that when we revised the Climate Action Plan, we did include and bolster the component for monitoring and measuring how we're doing, how we're progressing in the implementation of each of those measures. And that includes coming up with some draft performance metrics. So we can, as we're carrying out each measure, we can actually, measure how well we're doing, and we will report that back to the council. So we did include a regular feedback mechanism to the council. There have been some comments encouraging the formation of a stakeholder group to assist in that effort. That's not included in this Climate Action Plan. That's something that could get some discussion if the council and the Planning Commission so choose as we move along in this. And then I think the another question that came up about the references and the sources used in the Climate Action Plan. I did want to point out that we did in there document how we came up with each of the measures and how we estimated the emissions reductions. Those are well documented in there. And in terms of the sources used for the as the basis for the Climate Action Plan, there's a reference appendix in there that does document all of those sources, and we did rely on the science that the state relies on that are peer reviewed, and these come from the same sources that the state of California, Air Resources Board, Caltrans, EPA, et cetera, are using. So I think that's what I want to cover on that.
Mayor and Council and Planning Commission. So that, I think that in a very general way covers the comments that we heard, or at least the main topics. And if you had any specific questions for us at this point, we'd be pleased to answer those.
So I guess my first question would be to Mr. Ball. Is there any questions or any notes that you have that you think that need comment or response to that perhaps staff didn't speak to?
Mayor, thank you for asking. I think some of the folks who gave us testimony today about the Ponto Vision Plan didn't understand that was the staff's goal, is to have the vision plan incorporated into the general plan. So you had some testimony that there were buildings were too high, or that the buildings were over 35 feet. I took some notes there. And that the Ponto Vision did not include high density proposals. So that was one theme I picked up. The other theme was on the discussion of how Veterans Park fits into our recreation scheme.
So Veterans Park, in the original adoption of the citywide facilities improvement plan, which was the document that contained the details for the 11 performance standards that are the cornerstone of growth management. At that time, the Veterans Park acreage was allocated evenly to each of the 4 quadrants. So that is what's been carried forward. One of the constraints related to that is that the fee programs of the city related to parks have all been based on including that. It's my understanding Veterans Park is funded, or will be funded in part, through the citywide community facilities district that's been in place for quite some time. So making adjustments to that acreage because of the way the fees have been collected becomes very complicated.
I'm sorry, did you address the height question that they were?
Sure. So for the Ponto area, the land uses being proposed in the general plan and the zoning are consistent with what was described and shown in the Ponto plan. As you heard today, there is a development application in, and parts of the property are in a master plan area. So I believe as part of that development application, there are some requests being made about development standards. but that is not something that's part of the general plan or the actions before you on this item. It is something that we're working through with the developer, and he's working with the community, and so I would imagine there will be much more done on that and some refinements. But at this time, we're asking that you implement land uses in terms of designations that would implement the Ponto plan.
Mr. Kemp, is there anything that in your notes that need further response?
No, Your Honor.
Wow, noting the time. City Manager, do you have any comments at this moment?
No, sir, thank you.
Wow. Well, I just want to, it's about time for the council to adjourn, but I just want to say in closing from the council's perspective, I can't thank the audience enough, and I wish some of the others who were here earlier would have still been here, but all your comment has real meaning to us. It was actually a learning process for me today because there was testimony that gave me different views and different thoughts. And to be all honest about it, some of it wasn't even on my radar. So all the comments I felt today were very positive and to help build a better community. And I want to thank each and every one of you in the audience for participating. I want to thank my colleagues, the council, for today, for them being here as part of the process. And most importantly, Don New and your team. This has been a day or two to get to this moment in time. So, yeah. And again, thank you to the audience for being so courteous. So at this time, I think at our next, it's for me to adjourn to Ms. Scully and the Planning Commission. We're going to adjourn the City Council meeting and turn it back over to you as Planning Commissioners. And I think at this time you're in charge, and I would only ask that you'd give us 5 minutes to pick up our books and move on. So
We will
thank
give
you,
you a
everyone.
5-minute break, Mr. Mayor.